They toasted to my departure with expensive champagne, unaware that I had just forwarded the proof of their bribery to my encrypted server. I always knew my mother-in-law hated me, but I never imagined she would literally purchase her son's freedom like a used car. I thought my husband was leaving me because we had grown apart, until I found the bank transfer on his iPad. $5 million. That was the price tag on our 10-year marriage. They thought they had bought my silence, but all they really bought was their own destruction. The dining room of the Sterling estate was designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were 20 feet high, adorned with frescoes of Greek tragedies that seemed to look down on us with mocking pity. A crystal chandelier, heavy and dripping with glass teardrops, cast a fractured, cold light over the mahogany table. It was long enough to seat 30 people, yet there were only 3 of us tonight. Me, my husband Julian, and his mother Victoria. Outside, a relentless October rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sound was constant, a low, drumming drone that filled the oppressive silence inside. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like a clock counting down to an execution. I looked across the table at Julian. He was staring at his plate of seared scallops, pushing the food around with his silver fork but not taking a bite. He looked pale. His skin, usually tanned from his months on the yacht, looked sallow under the harsh light. Beads of perspiration had gathered on his upper lip, glistening like morning dew, despite the air conditioning being set to a frigid 68 degrees. "Is something wrong with the scallops, Julian?" Victoria asked. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. She sat at the head of the table, perfectly erect, her posture rigid. She was wearing a midnight blue silk blouse that probably cost more than my father's annual pension. Her gray hair was pulled back into a severe chignon, pulling her face tight, giving her a permanent expression of disdain. Julian jumped slightly at the sound of her voice. The fork clattered against the fine china, the noise echoing in the cavernous room like a gunshot. "No, Mother," Julian stammered, reaching for his wineglass. His hand trembled, sending ripples through the dark red Cabernet. He took a large gulp, almost choking on it. "They're fine. I'm just not hungry." "Pity," Victoria said, slicing into her own scallop with surgical precision. "We shouldn't waste good food or good time." She looked at him, her eyes hard and meaningful. "Right, Julian." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I looked from the mother to the son. There was a silent conversation happening between them, a transfer of command that I wasn't privy to. "Clara," Julian said, finally turning to look at me. He couldn't hold my gaze. He looked at my chin, then my shoulder, then the centerpiece of white lilies. "We need to talk." I put down my napkin. The linen felt rough against my fingertips. "We're eating dinner, Julian. Can't we talk later?" Now, Victoria commanded. She put her knife and fork down, aligning them perfectly parallel on her plate. "Do it now, Julian. Rip the bandage off." Julian exhaled, a long, shaky breath that smelled of expensive wine and fear. "Clara, it isn't working anymore. I'm unhappy. I've been unhappy for a long time." I stared at him, blinking slowly. The words didn't make sense. Just last week, we had been discussing booking a trip to the Maldives for our anniversary. Just this morning, he had kissed me goodbye before heading to the golf club. "Unhappy," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Julian, we just celebrated your birthday. You wrote me a card saying I was the love of your life." "Things change," he said, his voice gaining a little artificial strength, likely rehearsed. "I realize that I need space. I need to find myself. I feel suffocated, Clara. You're stifling me." "Stifling you?" I let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "I manage your schedule. I run your charity foundation. I nursed you through your back surgery last winter. I have dedicated 10 years to making your life easier." "And that's the problem," Victoria interjected. She swirled her wine, looking at the crimson liquid with satisfaction. "You've made him dependent, Clara. A man needs to be free. He needs a partner who understands his stature, not a caretaker." "I am his wife, Victoria," I snapped, looking at her. "Not his employee." "It gets longer," she said coolly. Julian reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the polished mahogany surface. It hissed as it moved, stopping just inches from my hand. "These are the papers," Julian said. "It's a generous settlement, Clara. The prenup was ironclad, you know that. You get nothing. But Mother and I decided to be benevolent. There's a lump sum, enough to get you an apartment in the city, maybe start a small business, something quaint." I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it. I felt like I was in a nightmare where I couldn't move or scream. "You had these drawn up?" I asked, looking at him. "When? How long have you been planning this?" "Does it matter?" Julian stood up. He looked relieved, like a man who had just dropped a heavy backpack. "It's done. I'm staying here at the estate tonight. You should go back to the townhouse and pack your things. The driver is waiting outside to take you."
"You're kicking me out."
I stood up too, my legs shaking. In the rain. "The driver will take you door to door," Victoria said, taking a sip of wine. "Don't be dramatic, dear. It's unbecoming." I looked at Julian one last time. I wanted to see regret. I wanted to see sorrow. But all I saw was a pathetic, weak man who was looking at his mother for approval like a dog waiting for a treat. "Fine," I whispered. "I'll go." I turned and walked out of the dining room. My heels clicked loudly on the marble floor of the foyer. I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and stinging, but I refused to let them fall. Not in this house, not in front of them. I didn't go straight to the car. I needed to get my purse from Julian's study. I walked down the long, shadow-filled hallway to the library. The room smelled of old paper and leather. It was Julian's sanctuary, where he played video games and pretended to work on investments. I walked to the desk to grab my clutch. That's when I saw it. His iPad was sitting on the desk, the screen glowing in the dim light. He must have forgotten to lock it in his nervousness before dinner. I shouldn't have looked, but instinct is a powerful thing. The screen was open to his banking app, specifically the Recent Transactions tab. I leaned in, squinting. There was a deposit, dated today, 4:00 p.m., just 3 hours before dinner. Sender, the Victoria Sterling Living Trust. Amount, $5,000, 00 memo contractual fulfillment, C, separation. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Separation. Clara, separation. He hadn't grown apart. He hadn't found himself. He had been paid. Victoria had bribed her own son to divorce me. $5 million. That was the price of my life. That was the value of 10 years of loyalty. I scrolled down. There was an email open in the background. It was from Victoria to Julian, sent yesterday. Subject, the proposal body. Julian, darling, the funds are ready to be deployed. As discussed, the transfer will initiate once the papers are served. $5 now, and the remaining $5 upon the final decree. Don't get cold feet. Think of the freedom. Think of the yacht in Monaco. She is an anchor, and I am offering you the wind. This millions. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. The sadness that had been crushing my chest evaporated instantly. In its place, a cold, hard knot of rage began to form. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips, making them tingle. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was a quaint little girl from the middle class who would take her severance package and disappear into the night, crying into her pillow. I pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady now. I took a picture of the bank transfer. I took a picture of the email. I forwarded the email to my secret encrypted account, the one Julian didn't know existed. Then, I wiped the iPad screen with my sleeve to remove my fingerprints. I grabbed my purse. As I walked back toward the foyer, I heard laughter coming from the dining room. "Cheers, darling," Victoria's voice floated down the hall. "To a fresh start. And to that dreadful woman finally being out of our hair." "To the yacht," Julian laughed. The sound was light, unburdened. I stopped by the large, gilt-framed mirror in the hallway. I looked at myself. I looked pale, my eyes wide with shock. I took a deep breath. I smoothed my dress. I fixed my hair. "Enjoy the champagne, Julian," I whispered to my reflection, "because it's the last expensive thing you're going to taste for a very long time." I walked out the front door and into the pouring rain. The Sterling driver was waiting, holding an umbrella open for me. "Where to, Mrs. Sterling?" he asked kindly. Don't call me that, I said, sliding into the back seat of the black car. The leather was cold. Take me to the city. And Arthur, drive fast. I watched the Sterling Manor disappear in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the rain and the night. It looked like a mausoleum. A beautiful, expensive tomb. They had started a war tonight. They had fired the first shot with a $5 million bullet. But they forgot one thing. I was the one who balanced the books for the last 10 years. I knew where every skeleton was buried. I knew about the offshore accounts. I knew about the tax evasions. I knew about the bribes to the zoning commission. Victoria wanted to play games with money? Fine. I was going to teach her the cost of doing business with Clara. I signed the divorce papers to let the bribe money hit his account, knowing that the moment it cleared, I would trigger the IRS audit that would seize everything they owned. My ex-mother-in-law thought she was dealing with a trophy wife who only knew how to arrange hydrangeas and host charity galas. She conveniently forgot that I have a master's degree in economics and that I was the one who digitized their archaic filing system 3 years ago. While they were popping champagne on their yacht to celebrate my departure, I was sitting in a dim office with the most ruthless forensic accountant in the city, handing over the keys to their destruction. The hotel room I had checked into was a stark contrast to the Sterling estate. The wallpaper was peeling slightly at the corners, and the radiator hissed and clanked like a dying animal. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale cigarettes. But to me, it smelled like freedom. I hadn't slept. I had spent the entire night on my laptop accessing the cloud server that Julian was too lazy to secure. He used the same password for everything. Victoria 1. It was pathetic. It was also the key to the kingdom. I watched the sunrise paint the city skyline in bruised shades of purple and orange through the dirty window. My eyes felt gritty, like they were filled with sand, but my mind was razor sharp. The sadness was gone, cauterized by the white-hot anger of seeing that bank transfer. Contractual fulfillment. They had reduced our marriage to a line item on a spreadsheet. Fine. I would reduce their legacy to a pile of ashes. I showered, scrubbing the scent of the Sterling estate off my skin. I put on my sharpest suit, a charcoal blazer that made me look like armor. I wasn't Clara the wife today. I was Clara the plaintiff. I took a cab to the warehouse district. The rain had turned into a steady, miserable drizzle that slicked the cobblestones with oil. I stopped in front of a brick building with no sign, just a heavy steel door. This was the office of Elias Thorne. Elias wasn't a lawyer. He was a forensic accountant, a man who hunted money the way a wolf hunts a deer. He was a legend in financial circles, known for finding assets that oligarchs and cartels thought were invisible. I buzzed the intercom. Who is it? A voice rasped, sounding like gravel in a blender. Clara Sterling, I said. I have the ledger. The buzzer buzzed long and loud. The door clicked open. Elias's office was a chaotic masterpiece of organized hoarding. Stacks of paper towered like skyscrapers on every surface. Monitors glowed blue in the gloom, displaying cascading lines of code and stock tickers. The room was hazy with the smoke of a clove cigarette, giving the space a cinematic, noir atmosphere. The only light came from the screens and a single green banker's lamp on the desk. Elias sat behind the desk. He was a small man, wiry and intense, with glasses so thick they magnified his eyes into owl-like proportions. He didn't look up as I entered. Sterling, he muttered, typing furiously. Big name, old money, real estate, shipping, and a hell of a lot of political donations. Why is a Sterling in my office? Ex-Sterling, I corrected, closing the heavy door behind me. The sound shut out the noise of the city. As of last night, I walked over to the desk and placed a heavy stack of printed documents on the only empty spot I could find. My husband was paid $5 million to divorce me, I said, by his mother. Elias stopped typing. He looked up. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. Paid, he asked. Like a hitman? Or a prostitute? Like a mercenary, I said. But that's not why I'm here. I don't care about the $5 million. I care about where it came from. Elias leaned back in his creaking leather chair, taking a drag of his cigarette. The smoke curled around his head like a halo. Go on. Victoria Sterling runs the family trust, I explained, my voice steady. On paper, the trust makes money from commercial rents in Manhattan, but for the last 3 years, the numbers haven't added up. The maintenance costs on the properties are inflated by 300%. They're paying contractors that don't exist. Elias's eyes narrowed behind his lenses. Shell companies. Classic laundering, but difficult to prove without the bank records. I have the bank records, I said. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the flash drive, the one I had kept hidden in the bottom of my jewelry box for 2 years. I had started copying files when I first noticed the discrepancies, not out of malice, but out of fear that Julian was getting mixed up in something dangerous. I wanted to protect him. Now, I would use it to bury him. This drive contains the real ledger, I said, placing it on the desk. Not the one they show the IRS, the one Victoria keeps on her private server. It shows transfers to the Cayman Islands, Panama, and a bank in Zurich that doesn't ask questions. Elias picked up the drive. He held it up to the light as if it were a diamond. "Do you know what this is, Mrs. Sterling?" he asked softly. "It's leverage," I said. "No," Elias chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "This is a nuclear bomb. If these numbers are real, Victoria Sterling isn't just looking at a fine, she's looking at 20 years in federal prison for tax evasion and wire fraud." "I know," I said. "And the $5 million she sent Julian? It came from the maintenance fund. It's untaxed, laundered money. If the IRS sees that transaction, they'll freeze every asset the family owns." Elias plugged the drive into his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up spreadsheets and PDFs. The blue light from the screen reflected on his face, highlighting the excitement in his eyes. He was an artist looking at a blank canvas. "Beautiful," he whispered. "Look at this. They're funneling cash through a charity for endangered sea turtles. How cliché." He looked at me. "What do you want, Clara? You want blackmail money? You want a bigger settlement?" I walked to the window and looked out at the gray, weeping city. I saw a billboard in the distance with the Sterling logo on it, a gold lion. It looked arrogant, untouchable. I don't want a settlement," I said, turning back to him. "They treated me like a transaction. They put a price on my life. I don't want their money, Elias. I want to bankrupt them. I want Victoria to lose the estate. I want Julian to lose the yacht. I want them to stand in the rain with nothing, wondering where it all went wrong." Elias smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Scorched earth," he said approvingly. "My favorite flavor." "Can we do it?" I asked. With this, he tapped the drive. "We can dismantle them piece by piece, but we have to be smart. If we just hand this to the police, their lawyers will bury it in procedure for a decade. We need to strike where they're vulnerable. We need to trigger an audit." "Not just any audit," Elias said, leaning forward. "A forensic audit triggered by a whistleblower. You." He pulled a blank form from a drawer. "Form 211, he said. "Application for award for original information. If you report tax fraud to the IRS and they recover the money, the whistleblower gets up to 30% of the recovered funds. If they owe $100 million in back taxes and penalties, I get $30 million. I finished the sentence. Legally." Elias grinned. "Clean. Untouchable. And the best part? They won't know it's you until the agents are kicking down the door of the manor." I looked at the form. Julian had sold me for $5 million. I was about to sell him out for 30. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Elias handed me a pen. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "There's one problem. The $5 million transfer to Julian. It happened yesterday. It might not have cleared the international SWIFT system yet. If Victoria gets suspicious, she can cancel it. We need that money to hit Julian's account to prove he's complicit in the laundering." "So we need to stall," I realized. "We need them to think everything is going according to plan." "Exactly," Elias said. "You need to play the part. Be the broken, defeated ex-wife. Don't fight the divorce. Sign the papers. Let them think they've won. Let the money land. Once the cash is in Julian's pocket, the trap is sprung." I nodded. It would be hard. I would have to see them again. I would have to let Victoria gloat. I would have to let Julian look at me with that pitying, arrogant stare. But I could do it. I was an actor now. "I'll sign," I said. "I'll give them exactly what they want." I took the pen and signed the whistleblower form. As the ink dried, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. "Julian, my lawyer is sending the papers to the townhouse. Sign them by noon. Don't make this difficult, Clara. Take the money and go." I stared at the message. The cinematic framing of the shot would show my reflection in the dark screen. A woman who looked calm, collected, and dangerous. I typed back, "Clara, I'll sign. Just tell your mother I said thank you." Elias laughed from behind his wall of monitors. "Oh, this is going to be fun." I walked out of the warehouse and back into the rain. But this time, I didn't feel cold. I felt electric. The game had changed. They were playing checkers with money. I was playing chess with the federal government. And checkmate was coming. She snatched the diamond from my finger to break my spirit, but she didn't know that with every scratch of the pen, I was authorizing the seizure of her entire empire. My ex-husband and his mother sat across the boardroom table, smirking as I picked up the pen to sign the divorce papers. They thought they were stripping me of everything: my home, my dignity, my future. They didn't realize that my signature wasn't a surrender, it was the final authorization code needed to send the IRS straight to their front door. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Sterling & Associates law firm felt like ascending into a different atmosphere, one where the air was thinner and the sharks wore Italian suits. I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors as the numbers ticked upward. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a beige cardigan and minimal makeup. I needed to look defeated. I needed to look like a woman who had spent the last 24 hours crying, not plotting a federal investigation. Ding! The doors slid open, revealing a lobby that smelled of white lilies and intimidation. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset who looked terrified of making a mistake, ushered me toward the main boardroom. "They're waiting for you, Mrs. Mahomes," sheked herself, looking down at her desk. Even the staff knew I was being erased. I walked into the boardroom. It was a masterpiece of corporate sterility. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, currently shrouded in gray mist. The 4th wall was lined with legal tomes that no one ever read. In the center sat a long, boat-shaped table made of black granite. It looked less like a table and more like an altar for human sacrifice. Victoria was sitting at the head of the table naturally. She wore a sharp, crimson blazer that clashed violently with the gray sky behind her. It was a power color. She looked vibrant, predatory. Julian sat to her right, slouching slightly, spinning his phone on the table. He refused to meet my eyes. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Vance who had the personality of a wet napkin and the morals of a hyena, stood up. "Clara," he said, not offering a hand, "please, take a seat. We want to make this as painless as possible." I sat in the single chair on the opposite side of the table. The cinematic framing was deliberate, me, small and isolated, against the 3 of them and the towering city behind them. I read the draft, I said, keeping my voice low and trembling. "It says I have to vacate the townhouse by noon tomorrow. That's very fast, Julian." Julian looked at his mother. Victoria nodded imperceptibly. "We have a buyer interested in the property." Julian lied, his voice cracking slightly. "It's business, Clara. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal," I repeated, looking down at my hands. 10 years of marriage, and it's just business. "Oh, stop the pity party," Victoria snapped, opening a file folder. "You're getting a lump sum. $200,000. That's more than you had when you married him. You should be thanking us." 200,000. They were keeping the $5 million bribe, the $50 million in offshore accounts, and giving me crumbs. "I just want it to be over," I whispered, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "Good," Vance said, sliding a heavy document across the granite. "This is the final decree. It includes a non-disclosure agreement. You are forbidden from discussing the Sterling family, their businesses, or the details of this settlement with the press or any third party. If you violate this, you forfeit the settlement and will be sued for damages." I looked at the NDA. It was standard for people with dirty secrets, but an NDA couldn't protect them from criminal subpoenas. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, a Mont Blanc. "Wait," Victoria said sharply. I froze, the pen hovering over the paper. My heart skipped a beat. Had she figured it out? Did she know I had met with Elias Thorne? Victoria leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Sen." The ring, she said. I looked up. Excuse me? The engagement ring. Victoria pointed to my left hand. It's a sterling family heirloom. The diamond belonged to Julian's great-grandmother. It was not a gift, it was a loan on the condition of a successful union. The union failed. I want it back. I looked at the ring. It was a 3-carat Asher cut. I had worn it every day for a decade. It had indented the skin of my finger. Julian finally looked at me. There was a flicker of shame in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by greed. She's right, Clara, he muttered. It belongs to the family. This was the test. If I fought back, if I showed my teeth, they might get suspicious. They expected the old Clara, the sentimental, emotional Clara, to beg to keep it. So I played the part. But Julian gave it to me, I said, my voice rising in panic. He put it on my finger in Paris. You can't take this. It's the only thing I have left. It's worth $40,000, Victoria sneered. Far too valuable for a librarian's daughter. Hand it over, or we deduct its value from your settlement. I stared at them. I let the silence stretch, letting them think they were breaking me. Slowly, painfully, I pulled the ring off my finger. It left a pale band of skin where it had been. I placed the ring on the black granite table. Victoria reached out and snatched it, inspecting the stone for scratches before dropping it into her purse. Good. Now sign. I looked at the paper again. I wasn't just signing a divorce decree, I was signing the trigger for the wire transfer. The moment this was filed, Victoria would send the $5 million to Julian's account to close the deal. And that transfer would be the final nail in their coffin. I touched the pen to the paper. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Television, show. And here, Vance pointed to the next page. And here, I signed 5 times. Done, Vance said, snatching the papers away as if he were afraid I would eat them. I'll file these electronically within the hour. The settlement funds will be wired to your account in 3 business days. 3 days, I asked. Standard processing. Vance dismissed. You can go now, Victoria said, not looking at me. She was already texting on her phone, probably checking on the Cayman accounts. I stood up. My legs felt light. The acting was over. Goodbye, Julian, I said. I hope the money makes you happy. It usually does, Victoria answered for him. I walked out of the boardroom, past the receptionist, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I leaned against the metal wall and exhaled. I pulled out my phone. I sent a single emoji to Elias Thorne. 1 minute later, a reply came. Elias, green light. We are monitoring the accounts. The moment the $5M hits Julian's ledger, we file the whistleblower packet. I walked out of the building and onto the busy street. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, allowing shafts of weak, pale sunlight to hit the wet pavement. Later, I hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. The nearest pawn shop, I said. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, confused. Pawn shop? You look like you just came from a funeral. No, I smiled, and this time it was real. I just came from a business transaction. And I have some earrings to sell. I touched my earlobes. I was wearing the diamond studs Julian had given me for our 5th anniversary. Victoria had forgotten to ask for those. They were worth $5 grand, enough to pay Elias's retainer and buy a bottle of very expensive scotch. I checked my banking app. The balance was low, but I felt richer than I had in years. Back in the boardroom, Victoria and Julian were likely toasting their victory. They were probably laughing about how easy it was to crush me. They were checking their flight status for Monaco. They had no idea that in about 4 hours, a computer server at the IRS headquarters would receive a flagged notification. Subject: high-value tax evasion, money laundering. Target: the Sterling Family Trust. Evidence attached: 5 gigabytes. The clock was ticking. And for the first time in 10 years, the time was on my side. They were packing Louis Vuitton bags for Monaco, but the only trip they took was in the back of a federal SUV, leaving their empire to be seized by the government. The $5 million hit my ex-husband's account at 9:02 a.m., officially confirming his role in a federal money laundering scheme. While he was likely sipping a mimosa and booking first-class tickets to Monaco, I was sitting in a smoke-filled office, watching the IRS server accept our whistleblower packet. They thought they were flying to paradise. They didn't know their itinerary had just been changed to a federal holding cell. In Elias Thorne's office, the only light came from the bank of monitors, casting a ghostly blue pallor over our faces. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and anticipation. On the center screen, a transaction log blinked green. Status completed. Sender, V. Sterling Trust Shell Corp. B. Recipient, J. Sterling Personal Amount, $5,000 when you expansage and experience and some partner practitioner in read. Special meeting, baby, Sterling. There it is, Elias whispered, his voice rasping with satisfaction. He leaned forward, the reflection of the numbers dancing in his thick glasses. The final link in the chain. They moved untaxed, laundered funds directly into a personal account to pay for a divorce settlement. It's not just tax evasion anymore, Clara. It's wire fraud. It's conspiracy. I stared at the screen. That number 5 million with all those zeros represented the end of my marriage. It was the price of my replacement. Do it, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the hesitation I had felt yesterday in the boardroom. Elias hovered his finger over the submit key. Once I send this, there's no going back. The algorithms pick it up instantly. Because of the amount involved and the flight risk, since they booked tickets to France this morning, the feds will move fast. We're talking hours, not days.
I said do it.
Click. The screen flashed. Submission received. Case ID 99-S*442. Now, Elias leaned back in his creaking chair, lighting a fresh clove cigarette. We watched the fireworks. 5 miles away at the Sterling estate, the atmosphere was jubilant. The morning sun had finally broken through the storm clouds, bathing the sprawling, manicured lawns in a deceptive golden light. Inside the master suite, expensive leather suitcases lay open on the silk duvet. Victoria stood by the window holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. She was wearing a silk kimono that cost more than most people's cars. She looked out over her domain, the rose gardens, the tennis courts, the fountain. She felt invincible. She had trimmed the fat from the family, gotten rid of the leech me, and secured her son's obedience with a heavy dose of cash. "Did the transfer clear?" she called out over her shoulder. Julian was standing by the mirror, adjusting his sunglasses. He looked younger, lighter. The guilt from the dinner table had evaporated the moment he saw his bank balance. "And get you lip balm, this peeler." Mother Julian grinned, checking his phone again. 5 big ones. I'm thinking I'll upgrade our suite in Monte Carlo. Maybe the penthouse? Don't spend it all in 1 week, darling, Victoria chided indulgently. Although, with the new tax shelters I set up in Panama, we'll be saving enough to refill it by Christmas. You're a genius, Mother Julian said, zipping up his carry-on. Clara never understood this life. She was always worrying about rules and ethics. It was exhausting. She was a peasant. Julian, Victoria took a sip of champagne. Peasants worry about rules. Kings make them. She turned back to the window. She frowned. At the end of the long, winding driveway, the heavy iron gates were opening. Are we expecting the driver this early? Victoria asked. The flight isn't until noon. Julian walked over to the window. Maybe he wants to beat traffic. But it wasn't a town car. It was a black SUV. Then another. Then a third. They were moving fast. Aggressive. They didn't slow down for the speed bumps. They tore up the gravel driveway, kicking up dust in their wake. Who is that? Victoria's voice tightened.
I didn't authorize any visitors.
The lead SUV screeched to a halt right in front of the fountain. The doors flew open before the wheels even stopped rolling. Men and women in blue windbreakers spilled out. They weren't wearing chauffeur uniforms. They were wearing tactical gear. On the back of their jackets, in bright yellow letters, was a 3-letter acronym. IRSCI Criminal Investigation. And behind them, 2 more cars. The FBI. Mother Julian's voice trembled. Who are they? Victoria dropped her champagne glass. It hit the hardwood floor, shattering into 1,000 diamonds, the liquid soaking into the expensive Persian rug. No, she whispered, the color draining from her face. That's impossible. My contacts. I have protection. Downstairs, the front door didn't open. It exploded inward. Crash. That crevon age jumps. Hit by Ferdy. The sound amplified through the cavernous house, bouncing off the frescoes and the marble floors. It was the sound of reality crashing into their fantasy.
Upstairs! Secure the second floor!
Julian backed away from the window, tripping over his suitcase. They're coming for us. Why are they coming for us? Shut up, Victoria hissed, her mind racing. Don't say a word. Not one word. Heavy boots thundered up the grand staircase. It sounded like an avalanche. The bedroom door flew open. 3 agents burst in, guns drawn but lowered. A woman in a sharp suit stepped forward, holding a badge high. Victoria Sterling?
Julian Sterling.
How dare you? Victoria drew herself up, trying to summon the matriarch persona one last time. Do you know who I am? I will have your badges for this! Get out of my house! The agent didn't even blink. She walked over to Victoria, stepping right over the broken champagne glass. Victoria Sterling, you are under arrest for tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering, the agent recited, her tone bored and professional. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. This is a mistake, Julian squealed as an agent grabbed his arm. My mother handles the finances. I just spend the money. I didn't do anything. We know about the $5 million transfer you received this morning, Mr. Sterling, the agent said, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. That makes you a co-conspirator. Cuff him. Click. Click. The sound of the handcuffs was sharper, colder than the champagne glass breaking. Victoria struggled as they cuffed her. My lawyer! Call Vance! He'll fix this! Mr. Vance is currently being picked up at his office, the agent said calmly. We have his files too. Nobody is fixing this, Mrs. Sterling. They dragged them out of the bedroom, past the packed Louis Vuitton bags that would never see Monaco. Back in the office, Elias's phone buzzed. He looked at the text. Target secured. Elias read. They have the devices. They have the servers. And they have the suspects. I closed my eyes and exhaled. I pictured Julian being shoved into the back of a federal car, the rain starting to fall again, wetting his expensive Italian loafers. I pictured Victoria, stripped of her dignity, realizing that her peasant daughter-in-law had checkmated the queen. It's done, I whispered. Not yet, Elias said, turning back to the screen. Now comes the seizure. They're going to freeze everything. The accounts, the properties, the yacht. By noon, your ex-husband won't be able to buy a stick of gum. Good, I said, opening my eyes. Let's make sure they freeze the wine cellar, too. I'd hate for them to drink away their sorrows. I stood up. I had one more stop to make. Where are you going? Elias asked. To the townhouse, I said. I have to vacate by noon, remember? I want to make sure I'm gone before the landlord comes to put a padlock on the door. Only the landlord is the government now. I walked to the door. Clara, Elias called out. You just took down a dynasty. No, I said, looking back. I just balanced the books. She told me I would always be the help as they dragged her away in chains, and I whispered back, I know. I helped you lose everything. My mother-in-law sat in a federal interrogation room, still wearing her ruined silk kimono, demanding to speak to the manager of the FBI. She truly believed her wealth made her immune to consequences. She didn't realize that in the next room, her precious son was crying into a metal table and trading her secrets for a lighter sentence. Watching their dynasty crumble through a one-way mirror was the most cinematic ending to a marriage I could have ever asked for. The interrogation room at the federal building was designed to strip you of your humanity. The walls were painted a color that could only be described as institutional despair, and the air conditioning was cranked down to a bone-chilling temperature. A single, buzzing, fluorescent light fixture hung overhead, casting a harsh, clinical glare that washed out all color and highlighted every pore, every bead of sweat, every crack in the facade. Victoria Sterling sat at the metal table. Her hair, usually a helmet of hairspray and perfection, was coming loose. Her mascara had run slightly, creating dark fissures under her eyes, but her posture was still rigid. She looked at the handcuffs bolted to the table as if they were a piece of dirty cutlery she had been served by an incompetent waiter. This is kidnapping, Victoria hissed at the empty room. My lawyer will have your badges. Do you hear me? I know senators. I hosted a fundraiser for the governor last month. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Agent Miller, the woman who had arrested her, walked in. She carried a thick file folder and 2 cups of lukewarm water. She sat down opposite Victoria, ignoring the outbursts. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Miller said, opening the file. Your lawyer, Mr. Vance, is currently in interview room 3. He's very chatty. It turns out he kept a cover-your-ass file on all your offshore dealings. He's handing over the Panama encryption keys as we speak. Victoria's face twitched. Vance is a coward. He knows nothing. I am a legitimate businesswoman. Legitimate businesswomen don't launder $40 million through a shell company registered to a dead man in the Cayman Islands, Agent Miller said, sliding a photo across the table. It was a picture of a bank statement, the specific statement showing the flow of funds from the charity to the private trust. We have the servers, Victoria the agent continued. We have the emails. We have the chat logs where you discuss cleaning the money. But the piece of evidence that really nailed the coffin shut, that was the transfer you made this morning. I gave my son a gift. Victoria lied smoothly, though a vein in her neck was throbbing. Is it illegal for a mother to help her son after a divorce? It is when the money comes from a slush fund flagged for criminal activity, Agent Miller said, and it is when that transfer is the direct result of a conspiracy to defraud the IRS. You see, we didn't just stumble upon this. We were invited. Victoria paused. Her eyes narrowed. Invited? We received a very detailed, very professional whistleblower packet this morning. Agent Miller smiled thinly. Someone who knew your passwords. Someone who knew exactly when that $5 million would hit Julian's account. Someone who balanced your books. I watched from behind the one-way glass in the observation room. The audio feed was crystal clear. They saw the moment the realization hit her. It wasn't an explosion, it was an implosion. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened slightly. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a pure, cold horror. Clara. Victoria whispered. The name sounded like a curse. She played you, Victoria, the agent said, leaning in. She knew you would try to buy Julian off. She waited for you to make the move. You walked right into the trap she set. Victoria slumped in her chair. The fight went out of her. For the first time in her life, she looked old. She looked small. Where's my son? She asked, her voice trembling. I want to see Julian. Julian is busy, Agent Miller said, glancing at the mirror. In interview room B, the scene was pathetic. Julian wasn't sitting. He was pacing the small room, his expensive Italian loafers squeaking on the linoleum. He was sweating profusely, his designer shirt clinging to his back. He looked like a trapped animal. Agent Reynolds, a stern man with a gray buzz cut, sat at the table watching him. I didn't know, Julian shouted, running a hand through his hair. I swear, Mother told me it was an inheritance. She said it was tax-free. I just signed where she told me to sign. You signed a lot of things, Julian, Agent Reynolds said calmly. You signed the incorporation papers for the shell companies. You signed the tax returns that omitted $40 million. And this morning, you accepted a $5 million wire transfer that you knew, or should have known, was dirty. I can give it back, Julian pleaded, slamming his hands on the table. Take the $5 million. Take the yacht. I don't care. Just let me go. I can't go to prison, man. I have a gluten allergy. I have anxiety. Prison isn't known for its gluten-free menu, Agent Reynolds deadpanned, but there is a way to help yourself. We need you to testify against your mother. We need you to confirm that she directed the laundering operations. Julian froze. He looked at the mirror. He didn't know I was behind it, but he looked right at me. Testify against Mother, he whispered. She'll kill me. She'll cut me off. She's going to prison for 20 years, Julian, Agent Reynolds said. She can't cut you off because there's nothing left to cut. The government is seizing everything. The estate, the cars, the accounts. You're broke, kid. The only currency you have left is the truth. Julian sank into the chair. He put his head in his hands. He sobbed, a loud, ugly, childish sound. She made me do it, Julian cried into his hands. She told me Clara was dragging us down. She told me the money would fix everything. I just wanted to be free. Well, Agent Reynolds pushed a notepad toward him. Write it down. Start from the beginning. I stood in the darkened observation corridor, shivering slightly despite the warmth of my coat. Elias Thorne was standing next to me, eating a vending machine sandwich. The sun rolled. Elias chewed thoughtfully, faster than I expected. I thought he'd hold out for an hour at least. He's never faced a consequence in his life, I said, watching Julian write his confession with a shaking hand. He doesn't have the spine for loyalty. He only has an appetite for comfort. And they just took his comfort away. You know what happens next? Elias asked. The seizure teams are hitting the bank right now. By noon, the Sterling name will be mud. The news vans are already setting up outside the estate. I want to see her, I said suddenly.
Victoria.
Yes, before they take her to processing. Clara, you don't have to. Elias warned. You won. Walk away. I need her to see me, I said. I need her to know that the peasant is the last one standing. I walked out of the observation room and down the hall. Agent Miller met me at the door. You can't go in, she said. But we're moving her to transport in 5 minutes. You can wait by the elevator. I waited. 5 minutes later, the door to the interrogation room opened. 2 marshals led Victoria out. She was shackled at the waist and ankles. She shuffled, the chains rattling, a stark contrast to the silence of her dining room. She looked up and saw me. I stood by the elevator wearing my simple beige cardigan, holding my purse. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her. Victoria stopped. The marshals tugged at her arm, but she planted her feet. Her eyes burned with hate, but underneath the hate, there was respect. The reluctant respect of a predator who realizes they have been hunted by something bigger. You think you've won, Victoria rasped, her voice dry. But you'll never be one of us, Clara. You'll always be the help. I know, I said softly. I helped you lose everything. Move it, the marshal barked. No. They dragged her into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off her face forever, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying for 10 years. I turned to leave. Julian was being led out next. He saw me. He stopped crying for a second. Clara, he shouted. Clara, help me. Tell them I'm a good person. Tell them I loved you. I looked at my ex-husband, the man who sold me for $5 million. I can't lie to the FBI, Julian, I said. It's a felony. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. The sunlight outside was blindingly bright. It washed over the concrete steps, cleansing the city. I had no husband. I had no home. I had $200 in my bank account until the whistleblower reward came through in a year or two. But as I hailed a cab, I realized something. I was free. And freedom didn't cost $5 million. It was priceless. He sent me a letter from prison begging for commissary money, and I sent back a 2-word reply that cost me nothing but gave me everything. Insufficient funds. My ex-husband sold our marriage for $5 million, thinking it would buy him a life of luxury. Today, I stood in the back of a federal courtroom and watched the judge sentence him to 5 years in prison while his mother screamed that the jury was rigged. They lost the estate, the yacht, and their freedom. And as for me, I just received a check from the IRS that proves revenge isn't just sweet. It's profitable. 18 months after the raid, the federal courthouse smelled of floor wax and quiet desperation. The gallery was packed. The fall of the Sterling dynasty had been the tabloid's favorite meal for a year and a half. I sat in the back row wearing a simple navy dress, blending into the crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. The bailiff called the court to order. All rise. The side door opened and they walked in. The visual contrast was jarring. The last time I saw Victoria Sterling, she was wearing a silk kimono and holding champagne. Now, she was wearing a drab, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion, making her look like a ghost. Her hair, once her crowning glory, was gray and limp, tied back with a cheap elastic band. She didn't look at the gallery. She stared straight ahead at the judge, her jaw set in a line of bitter defiance. Julian shuffled in behind her. He looked even worse. He had lost 20 pounds. His eyes were hollow, darting around the room nervously. When he saw me in the back row, he froze for a second. His lips moved, forming a word I couldn't hear but understood perfectly. Sorry. I didn't mouth anything back. It was too late for apologies. Judge Harrow, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, read the sentencing. The room was so silent you could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Victoria Sterling. The judge's voice boomed. For the crimes of tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering, this court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Additionally, all assets seized by the government are hereby forfeited. Victoria didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes, as if shutting out the reality would make it disappear. 15 years. She was 62. She would likely die in a cell. Julian Sterling, the judge continued. Julian flinched. For your cooperation with the prosecution, the court has shown leniency. You are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Julian put his head on the table and sobbed. It was a pathetic, broken sound. He had sold me to get his mother's money, and in the end, her money had bought him a cage. As the marshals led them away, the heavy chains rattling against the floor, I stood up. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel glee. I felt a profound sense of balance. The scales had finally tipped back to center. 3 months later, I drove back to the Sterling estate. It wasn't a social call. It was an auction. The U.S. Marshals Service was liquidating the assets to pay back the millions in back taxes. The gates were open to the public. The lawn, once manicured to within an inch of its life, was slightly overgrown. Strangers were walking through the rose garden, trampling the flowers Victoria had prized more than her own children. I walked into the foyer. The house felt empty, stripped of its soul, if it ever had one. Tags hung from every piece of furniture. Lot 4-2, mahogany dining table. Starting bid, $2,000. $2,000. I ran my hand along the table where Julian had handed me the divorce papers. It was just wood now, cold, dead wood. Excuse me, a woman in a heavy coat bumped into me. Are you bidding on the chandelier? I looked up at the crystal monstrosity that had loomed over so many miserable dinners. No, I smiled. I think it casts a very cold light. I wouldn't recommend it. I walked into the library. The desk where I had found the iPad was gone, sold earlier that morning. The shelves were empty. I found Elias Thorne standing by the window looking out at the rain. He was wearing a trench coat, looking like a character from a detective movie. I figured I'd find you here, Elias said, not turning around. Coming to dance on the grave? Just paying my respects, I said, standing beside him. It's strange. This house used to terrify me. Now it's just a building. It's a liquidation asset, Elias corrected. And speaking of liquidation, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a stiff, government-issued envelope. The IRS moves slowly, Elias said, but they always pay their debts. The recovery from the seizure was significant. They found $45 million in the offshore accounts, plus the value of the real estate. He handed me the envelope. Your cut, he said. Standard whistleblower award. Less my fee, of course. My hands didn't shake this time. I opened the envelope. It was a check from the United States Treasury. Pay to the order of Clara Sterling. Amount $9,200 of Spring Crushton's Witty.
Pay to the order of Clara Sterling.
Amount $9,200.
Smooth, engaging voice for book narration, television, and social media. $9,200,000. Almost double what Julian had been bribed with. And I had earned every cent of it legally. Not bad for a librarian's daughter, Elias smirked. Not bad at all, I whispered. What are you going to do with it? Elias asked. Buy the house back? It's going cheap. I looked around the room. I looked at the spot where Julian used to play video games while I balanced the checkbook. I looked at the ghosts of my unhappiness in every corner. No, I said firmly, this place is cursed. I don't want their legacy. I want my own. I walked out of the auction, leaving the strangers to bid on the scraps of the Sterling Empire. I bought a small cottage on the coast. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have frescoes or marble floors, but it had big windows that let in the warm sunlight and a garden where I planted wildflowers that grew however they wanted, messy and free. I opened my own financial consulting firm, specializing in forensic audits for spouses going through high-conflict divorces. I became the nightmare of every wealthy spouse trying to hide assets. They called me the auditor. One evening, sitting on my porch with a glass of wine, bought with my own money, I got a letter from prison. It was from Julian. Clara, it read in shaky handwriting, "I'm sorry. I miss the way you used to make coffee. The coffee in here is terrible. Can you put some money on my commissary account, please?" I looked at the letter. I looked at the ocean crashing against the rocks below my house. I took a pen. I wrote back 2 words. Insufficient funds. I dropped the letter in the mailbox and walked back inside. The air was salty and clean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. My ex-husband's family tried to buy my silence. Instead, they funded my freedom. And let me tell you, freedom is the best investment I ever made. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes justice, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments what's the best investment you've ever made. I read every one. Thanks for watching.